What's up, guys? Thanks so much for checking out the channel. Today we are starting a new series where we're going to start covering some of the classic second AD&D modules, campaign settings, and so on. And we're going to start, and this will take a long series of these, but we'll be covering our favorite personal setting, which is the Birthright campaign setting, which in many ways, if you're a fan of like Game of Thrones and stuff like that, you'll definitely see some similarities and inspirations there, and some interesting potential theories there where some of the things in Birthright may have influenced some of the things that you do see in Game of Thrones. There's some interesting parallels there, but we'll talk about that in our series of videos. But nonetheless, this is our favorite setting. And came out back in 1995, and then had about I think it was a year and a half, 2-year product run, and even saw a computer game release, which was pretty fun for back then as well, called Gorgon's Alliance. But we are going to start slowly, and this is kind of the campaign box, and this has definitely seen some wear and tear since we picked it up back when it came out. So we've definitely run a lot of campaigns, various kinds in this. So yeah, this thing's been a trooper for about 25 years. But anyway, so we'll be covering the main core box here, talking about the way this is different from your typical D&D settings, sort of a little bit about the history of the setting itself, the development, how it plays, differences in not just factions, I should say, but like races, classes, things like that, what the core box really gives you, and that's kind of be part of our little overview / review today before we really get into depth of it. Then we'll talk about all the various countries and locales and other things that the core box affords us, kind of in that starting area that the setting entails. Then we'll start looking at the expansions, which cover different parts of the continent where this takes place, Cerealia. So the different factions there, all the other offshoot adventures, supplements, and then the other smaller aids, things called like the player's guide, I think, to so-and-so country or locale. So we'll see a whole lot of those and a lot that the game entails. So Birthright in some ways is sort of 3 games in one. You've got your D&D aspect to it, so going on adventures, things like that, and this puts you basically in the place of, instead of just being a lowly adventurer to start out with, you can approach this in different ways where you're actually like a ruler of a country or a temple or a guild or things like that, which again, there's a lot of things that tie into that. There's a war game component built into it as well, which we kind of have off on the side here. This thing's definitely been through hell as well, but they give you kind of like this little cardboard war chest to keep all your army cards in there. We'll talk about that aspect of the game as well. And then there's a whole separate, very detailed game system in here for actually running and managing your country, which is kind of what the one computer game focuses on to a large degree. But so in that sense, it's got elements of like Risk built in and other sort of kingdom building games and stuff like that, but just on a very detailed level, while still being pretty interesting and playable too. So let's jump into the box, because that's going to be our main focus here, is just kind of showing what the box entails. And again, this thing is or has been through a lot of play, so we get a really awesome custom DM screen. And again, keep in mind, guys, this is 2nd edition, so obviously a lot of the stuff, if you're just playing in 5th or aren't familiar with the older editions of the game, a lot of this is going to be strange to you. But the one side here has sort of D&D or adventuring information specific on sort of the first half of the panels here, and the other 2 panels are basically focusing on a lot of the information you need to help if you're running the countries and things like that. So just quick information there to help you moderate and do that to help your players, and some really awesome art on here, which kind of extends that art from the cover, and which really just is one of the things that drew me to the setting here. Just lots of good stuff. So if we can get this to cooperate and pull out, there we go. So, but yeah, I mean, how would you not want to jump into a setting like this with art like that? So again, this is, like I said, one of our personal, if not our just actual favorite campaign setting. So we still run sessions and campaigns out of that, even in 5th, just with some conversion work. So let's get that tucked away. This was actually a separate release, but kind of keeping our core box, called the Conspectus, which was cool. So a little bit of history on the setting, gives you a map as well of the continent. We're not going to bust that open just yet, but a little bit of rundown on the continent, the races, But again, this all takes place on this larger continent called Cyrilia, with a little bit of play on that one in the southwest there, Aduria. But yeah, there's lots and lots of big differences in this compared to your typical setting, and this is basically everything that was released for it. And we really do have everything for it now. So I think there might be I think one obscure like domain source book that I think is for some reason on Amazon or something like that for a ridiculous price. So we're probably not going to pick that up. But lots of good stuff out here, and even a few things that were released later via the community and so on and so forth. So things like the Book of Regency, for example. I think Hogan Mark might be the one that was floating out there on the internet too for, again, that crazy price. But we do have just about everything else. So, and there was even a special adventure in a Dragon magazine that we're going to be looking at too. The one thing I think that we don't really have are all the novels. Those have been a little bit harder to track down, but that's still something that we'll still work on. So what you do get in the box, you get a rule book, which runs you through basically what is Birthright, how background on the setting, the way that the races are different. There are some major differences and things that you don't get to do. Psionics, for example, is not in here at all. Things talking about your bloodline and so on and so forth. So we'll have separate videos on the history of the setting, but just as a quick tour through this right now. So just really explaining what the setting is, how you can approach playing it. So whether you just want to be an actual sort of common adventurer or sort of a blooded leader of whether it's a country or a church or anything like that. But this setting runs off of, for a lot of people, bloodlines that are in divinely inherited bloodlines. They give you all kinds of these extra powers and things like that. And again, we'll talk about that more when we talk about the history and background of the setting. But for now, basically, you're a ruler. If you are ruling any type of country or other domain, you are sort of divinely, through your bloodline, which is inherited by these former gods that died, you're divinely tied to your sort of right to rule the land, and that grants you powers and abilities depending on the strength of your bloodline and depending on which god your bloodline derives from as well. Then it talks about the new gods and stuff as well. So lots of interesting things to go through there. And again, other sort of powers here, so Cold Rider is really interesting, and then the gods for the other races. There's a really interesting concept called the Shadow World as well, which the halflings sort of fled from that. That used to be where they lived, so they're kind of halfway between these two worlds. But the Shadow World is basically the same as the regular world, just laid on top of this sort of demi-realm that's kind of like the same as the actual regular world, but just a sort of dark shadow of it with all kinds of other weird things that are happening there. And not to spoil anything, but we'll talk about that in more detail as well. But anyway, the rulebook obviously gives you a lot of detail on there. Ruins of Empire is a great one as well that you get in here. So that you get these two big 96-page books to really give you everything you need to get started, but runs through the different areas that the sort of starting setting kind of incorporate or lets you play, sort of the ruined empire of Anweir, and the different areas there. So you got the southern coast, the west coast, the heartlands, the eastern marches, northern marches, some of the named personalities, not all necessarily rulers of countries. So there's a lot of adventurers or other NPCs out there of various good to evil persuasion, so we say. And then also really includes a really awesome sort of starting adventure too, that can be for people of different levels, and is pretty easy to incorporate just about anywhere you're deciding to start playing here. But yeah, it gives you a little bit of background on again, the setting, a little bit more of that, holidays, things like that, record keeping, and then in detail the different areas of this sort of ruined empire and also NPC kingdoms that are out there. So what's available for you as the player to play as, if you're deciding to go the route of being a ruler of a kingdom or other types of holdings. So you got physical countries, you got churches, guilds, there's even something for wizards where you control various sources and ley lines and stuff like that. So there's just a whole lot out there, and it can be overwhelming to start off with too. So again, definitely worth going over that in detail, which again we'll have a pretty lengthy series of videos covering all that. But again, this book does a great job of that. We get a couple of maps. This one, and again, we'll show these in a separate video, but we get a map to actually fight battles between armies, which is really cool. Again, that's a whole other sort of component of this setting. Some people like it, some people didn't. I thought it was pretty interesting, but just a way to fight massive battles with sort of these cards that represent your units, and then you can incorporate your wizards and other named characters in there as well for various stats and other stat buffs and other abilities to those units. So it's an interesting little sub game, really, and again, really allows you to test your skill in different ways as far as ruling a country is concerned. So, can you manage your country as far as like not being too harsh with your laws, not taxing too heavily, dealing with the various maybe competing religions that you might have to deal with depending on the country you've chosen, or competing guild interests. You got foreign influences of various kinds. So there's just all kinds of different levels of skill required to properly rule a country if you're going that route. Again, the game does let you very easily just play as a common adventurer, or even an adventurer with a bloodline, but maybe not an actual ruler. So there's just different ways you can go about that as well. A map as well. So the first map basically just shows the whole continent without sort of details for the countries. This one will show the different borders and the different levels as far as like sort of population and sort of versus sort of magical potential of these different provinces within the country. So the first number is sort of your level of civilization or development, and the second number is your magical potential. So typically the higher the first one is, the lower the second one. So like here you can see this like a 3, but then there's a 6 because it's largely undeveloped. So, but little things like that that again we'll cover in detail later, but also gives you sort of the actual calendar on the side here. So again, really in depth to help you get into the setting. This book here, which actually I think the first one in the trilogy here, just called the Atlas of Cerealia. So basically runs through, let's see if we can get this actually open here. This is really the history book to show you the sort of full picture of the setting from sort of all these various peoples basically migrating from this other continent, Aduria, fleeing the shadow. So basically the Sauron of this setting, and establishing life on this new continent, and kind of how they spread out. So you have your typical medieval European culture, more of like a Viking, Scandinavian type culture here. The Rurik, the Brecht or Brechtur are kind of like a Germanic, North Sea, Baltic type of culture. The Kinazi, or formerly the Massacians, more of a Middle Eastern culture. And then the Voss, really kind of representing like the Rus, like the early Russian peoples and stuff like that there. But showing how all that developed and how they spread out, and then how the empire formed, and then gradually disintegrated and stuff like that. So, but we'll save that for another video. And then, and this is one of the things that I just love about second ed sort of core boxes, is just the sheer amount of stuff that they tend to give you. So all these extra handouts. This is, and I wish they would have had this for like every single country or domain out there, but just very detailed drawing here of this often sort of recommended starter country, Rowzone. So just showing the different provinces within there, actual other cities, villages, road systems, and sort of geographical features. So it's really neat to see that. And then sort of what a typical record sheet of your country would look like. So, because again, you do have to keep track of where your actual holdings are that you control. You definitely want to know who controls other things in your country, just in case they might be scheming against you, especially if there's foreign influences there. What kind of taxes you're collecting, loyalty for that, the different provinces, what your expenses are, how much money you're taking in, or your overall power as a country, your personal stats, and then just like your actual resources that you have. So it's not just gold, but you generate this thing called regency, which is sort of a reflection of your power and influence in the country. Your armies, where they're located, any trade routes you might have, whether they're on land or naval. So there's just so many cool things if you like that sort of country building aspect to it. So we get a sheet here, kind of nice color here, showing the continent itself that we play on, mainly again Cerealia. There's a little bit of info on Aduria here. You kind of play like this pirate kingdom, and then some of the expansions kind of get into sort of this far north on this other continent Thale. But sadly, those weren't always explored in the greatest detail, just because the product line essentially got canceled by that point. You get a nice blank version of the Annuarian setting too, so you can kind of pencil in your country essentially that you've decided to go with, and then lets you keep track of just some basic stats there and kind of any expansions that you might have gotten yourself into by conquering your neighbors. So you get that, and again, this they went so just super detailed into this. So pronunciation guide, which you kind of need for some of these pronunciations, because there's for the different countries, like the elves, they kind of, there's like some influence of like Welsh and Gaelic and other things. So some of these pronunciations, you definitely need a little bit of a guide to that. So for example, like this country here is actually just pronounced Gore. This one, Bo Ruin. Just lots of interesting things there. So if you're into linguistics at all, this is actually kind of a treat as well. So, and then just some suggested names for depending on where your characters are from as well. Then basically how to run your country. So kind of a reference sheet that you can make copies of for your players. What you can do, what your actual turn consists of, actions that you get to take as a country. And this is where this sort of sub game is really interesting. Like you could really, even though it's not necessarily like role playing in the typical sense of just going on adventures, but if you really just wanted to focus on the country building aspect, and we run campaigns like that too, but you have all these, it's a really detailed separate game that you could play, or obviously incorporate with actual adventures and other stuff. But there's just anything you could basically think of as far as like running a country is concerned, you can do it. You want to send assassins to take out enemy leaders or stuff like that, you can do that. You can declare war, build up things, work on, forging trade routes, all kinds of other things. It's about as detailed as you want to get with it. And some of the expansions even add to that as well. This is just a blank sheet to sort of keep track of that as well. So again, photocopy for your players there. Then this, if you wanted to, kind of like that earlier map of Rosso, and if you wanted to like sort of colorfully draw out your country or territories as is, you could go with that. Then just to give you a look at some of these different cultures, so again, this is our typical setting here, Annuir, so kind of like medieval Europe, the Brecht, more Germanic, Baltic states, the Kinazi, sort of more Middle Eastern, the Rurik, more Viking inspired, and then the Voss, again, more sort of the Rus, early Russians there. Then some couple of sheets here, and again, expansions add to this as well. So some of the differences with giants, for example, or monsters in the setting, and even some of the named ones, because there are some very nasty big name NPCs here, some of the big bads that you will see in various parts. But anyway, Cerulean giants, some of the differences there. So you got forest and ice giants, their background. Dragons, which are a very rare thing in this setting, but they're all pretty damn powerful. The Orogs here, again, I think these are all pretty common now with 5th ed. But again, keep in mind when this first came out, right? So like mid-90s, 2nd ed still. So, but the Orogs, and they have a really interesting place in this setting as well. Goblins as well, just some differences there, and there are actual like goblin-run kingdoms and even sort of Orog-led kingdoms as well in various parts. So you actually have to deal with those as neighbors depending on where you what country you're playing as. This is the main baddie for the setting, the Gorgon, and he's got a really interesting backstory, but just give you something of an idea of power level, right? And obviously you got to do some conversion between 2nd and 5th, but level 25 fighter, level 16 wizard, and just a bajillion special abilities and history with him. So he gets a sheet all unto himself. So, but yeah, this is basically the guy. This is the sort of the current Sauron of the setting, although there's a bigger evil behind him. But we'll leave that for another video. But yeah, this is basically the guy that all these countries, certainly the ones that are closer to him, fear. So we'll get into him in a separate video. Rove, the Manslayer. So the elves are really interesting in this setting. They're very xenophobic and sort of pissed off at the humans for taking over large areas that used to belong to them. And so yeah, a lot of them have sort of never, well, actually most of them have never really forgiven the humans for that. So playing as an elf in the setting is definitely brings some interesting challenges to it, especially if you're like a pure elf, not like a high elf. So, but this guy is sort of the main guy leading the resistance in one of the areas. And just absolutely hates humans. But this guy's a badass unto himself as well. So, level 16 fighter, level 15 mage, and again, just tons and tons of other abilities, and really cool backstory there. And one of the actual adventures that is a separate module, I think runs through his you actually sort of invade his one province for part of it, if I recall correctly. The Sea Drake. So another interesting thing with this setting is some monsters just don't exist, but there is basically like one sort of like almost like prototype of that monster. So there aren't really vampires in this setting. There is the vampire. There is the hag. There's in this case the Sea Drake. And again, the backstories and all these monsters are just really interesting as well. But again, just really if you want sort of big nasty things to go up with, the setting has it in spades for you. So, and again, gives you a really good background on where it is, or where it can be found, and sort of, if you really want to go up against something like that, you can certainly try. The spider's really cool too. This goblin that was essentially turned into this hideous spider, and it's just, I think like a couple thousand years old, if I remember, but has its own sort of domain, even though you can't really call it a proper country, but it's kind of a thorn in the side to, I think, like the 5 or so countries that border it. But lots of people would not be sad if somebody were to actually take this thing down. But yeah, so you get all that in the starter box, and then like I said, we also get these army cards, which the expansions also provide you more with for those other countries that it or other settings that it explores. So we're just going to take a couple of these, but you get a whole lot here, and it's part of the fun of building up your country and expanding your armed forces. So this is its own sub game again, and we'll get into the rules in a separate video, but it's a pretty simple system for figuring out, like, if you've been able to hit or damage things. But you got different levels of infantry. Some of them will have special abilities. These are all like mercenary cavalry, stuff like that here. You get low quality levy troops, elven archers, obviously going to be really good at shooting, dwarven guards, just rock solid infantry. Even goblin and orog infantry, some of the other later things. Photocopied some extras here. There's giant units, there's units of undead, and this is one of the areas too where the setting can really shine too, because wizards in this setting, which we'll cover when we start covering things in more detail, but there's basically 2 types of wizards. There's sort of the common magician, which basically is focused on like illusions and stuff like that, and they're not really able to access true magic, so they only get sort of up to, I think, 2nd level in those other disciplines. So the actual true wizards who can access the full range of magic are exceedingly rare. If you're a ruler of a country or other type of holding, like a wizard that controls sources and stuff like that, you may have the ability, or even priests, I should mention as well, have the ability to cast things called like battle magic. So you can, instead of just applying a spell to maybe like just a couple of guys or something, you can apply bonuses or penalties, or just attack like actual outright like military units, which is really cool. So priests may be able to like buff the leadership of a whole unit or their resistance to certain, like, let's say missiles or something like that. Wizards could just bring down hellfire and brimstone on a whole army if they wanted. There's also, along with that, things called realm spells, so being able to cast magic that affects a whole province or an entire country, or if you want to like use that to help your own country or to hurt other enemy countries, you can do things like that. So there's, again, just so many levels to this the setting, which is just really awesome. So again, this is why it is our favorite setting, just with all these different things that you can do. So it's There's a lot of products out there, and again, it didn't have like the longest shelf life as far as like how many years it was supported by TSR before Wizards took it over. I think it was really just about a 2-year run, if not quite that. So that being said, in that time they still put out a lot of things, and there's been a dedicated fan community since then that has kept it going and added conversions for, at first third ed, fourth, and then fifth, just other expansions for things that just never quite got done while the game was sort of an active production line. So I think that's called Birthright.net, if I'm not mistaken. We'll put a link in the description for you guys. But yeah, there's just so much you can do in this setting, and again, whether you're playing as just a common adventurer, running as an actual ruler, just focusing on the actual like running the country sort of sub game within the game here, fighting actual battles. There's just so much that you can do here, and it was a great sort of test to see if you really could run a kingdom while dealing with all these different things that you would typically have to deal with. Running your country right, dealing with enemies, potential assassination attempts on you, various competing people trying to influence you in different ways, building up trade. So again, there's a lot of other like games and board games and stuff that give you a hint of doing that, but with this, combining it with D&D, just really I think sort of gives you sort of like the ultimate sandbox to play this stuff in. So there are, of course, some criticisms of the setting. We'll get into those as we get through the various products in detail. But by and large, you have the flexibility as someone running a campaign to modify the things that you don't like and make it work for you. But again, overall, I think this is just like one of the coolest campaign settings ever. So again, we'll be covering this in a whole series of videos. This is just sort of the start in a review of the core box. So if you can find a good copy on eBay, for example, I typically see them maybe in like the $60, $70 range, sometimes more, depending on the quality, but well worth it. Again, all these old second ed sort of big box sets to start a campaign setting just were chock full of stuff. And really, if you think about these, I think used to cost like $30 to $35 when they were first released. That's just a steal, especially back then. But even now, if you can find it for a decent price and make sure they're complete, it's well worth getting into, guys. So we'll be showing off all the other things for the setting, but then also again covering all the other things in detail that the core box gives you and explaining how the game works and stuff like that. So definitely stay tuned. We appreciate you guys stopping by. Let us know in the comments as well if you've played Birthright, been on the fence, you've seen it or heard about it, your experiences with it. What are your favorite parts of this setting? Some things you don't like or didn't like if you haven't come back to the setting in a while. And yeah, just hit us up in the comments. We definitely try to respond to everything. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks again so much for stopping by, guys. We'll see you